In the general election of 1992, everybody was predicting a very close race between the two leading parties, Labour and the Conservatives. However, the predictions were wrong. A subtle feature of the polling process meant that these predictions were based on a group of people that did not represent the country. Who won? Well, first, let's look at what went wrong. This is Mr. Butler Maths, and in this video we are looking at what selection bias is, and why things go wrong when we don't take it into account. Let's return back to 1992. The Conservatives have been in power since 1979. As with any election, the people want to know who is going to win. To find out, a polling company asks a sample of people who they intend to vote for. They will use their findings from this small sample to predict how the country as a whole will vote. They have two decisions to make. Firstly, how many people should be included in their sample? And secondly, what type of people should be included in their sample? Let's start with the first question. When trying to work out how many people to include in their sample, the polling company has to manage a trade-off between reliability and practicality. Suppose there is a population of 100 people. There were actually 43 million people who could vote, but I can't fit that many people on a screen. The polling company could ask every person how they intend to vote, which would make their prediction very reliable. But that would take ages, and they would have to hire some people to help out, making it very expensive too. Instead, if the polling company wants to keep things very quick and easy, they could ask just one person. This, however, would greatly reduce the reliability of their prediction, because there is no reason that this one person would represent the whole country. Instead, polling companies aim to get a balance. Normally they ask a few thousand people. For simplicity, in this example, where I only have 100 people in total, I'm going to ask 10 people. That's 1/10 of my 100-person population. Let's now turn to the second question facing the polling company. After they've decided how many people they want to ask, they need to decide what type of people they want to ask. In doing so, they need to be very careful about who is in their sample. If the polling companies are not careful about their sample, then it is likely that their results will be affected by selection bias. Selection bias is the bias that is introduced by not having a sample that represents the population. For example, not everybody owns a business. People who own businesses want different laws and policies to people who don't own businesses. Consequently, business owners are not representative of the entire population. And suppose the polling company asked 10 business owners how they intended to vote, and maybe they got the results that 60% said they'd vote Conservative, 30% said they would vote Labour, and 10% said they would vote Liberal Democrat. Now, they could make a prediction for the whole country based on these business owners. However, because this sample is unrepresentative of the whole country, it's unlikely to be a good prediction. Now, you might think this is quite obvious and easy to avoid. The polling company should just make sure they ask a range of different people. And in fact, polling companies do this. They ask a representative sample by taking into account age, gender, and social class. However, even after doing this, there are ways in which selection bias can still cause problems. To understand this, let's turn to the practicalities of polling a sample of people. Now, polling can either be done in person or on the phone. Let's start with the in-person example. If a polling company wants to interview people with a range of different ages, different gender, and different social classes, it's easier for them to look for these people in a town than in the countryside, simply because there are more people in urban areas, that's towns and cities, than in the countryside. However, people living in these urban areas are generally more likely to vote Labour than those living in the countryside. So this is one area where the polling companies have to be careful of selection bias. They can't just interview the easiest people to interview because they might not be representative. And in fact, this was one of the places where things did go wrong in the 1992 election, leading to those incorrect predictions. Another variation of selection bias also crept in and had a significant impact on the polls, and this was even more subtle. Some polls were completed over the phone. A person from a polling company would have a list of the type of people they would need to interview in order to achieve a representative sample. So instead of just calling all the business owners, let's say I know I need to call one woman aged between 50 and 60, one man aged between 20 and 30, and so on. Now, while some people are happy to answer the phone to a stranger and share who they were intending to vote for, it's not the same for everyone. In fact, as many as 35% of people either didn't answer the phone at all or refused to say who they would vote for. These people were recorded as non-responders. Let's represent these non-responders with a white circle. The interviewer called somebody else with the same characteristics. For example, another woman aged between 50 and 60. If everybody was equally likely to not answer the phone, then this wouldn't matter. However, some people were less likely to pick up the phone than others. And after the election, it was identified that Conservative voters were more likely to keep their voting preferences private. This meant the polls included too many Labour supporters. This became known as the shy Tory phenomenon. These various forms of selection bias combined to make the predictions of the polling companies wrong. Instead of a close race, the Conservatives were always ahead and went on to win their biggest ever number of votes and lead the country for a further 5 years. While it might not have changed the result of the 1992 election, if the polling companies had a better understanding of selection bias, their predictions definitely would have been better. This is quite a different type of video from the ones that I'd normally make, but I found it quite interesting to try and do something else that's still related to maths and statistics, but also brings in some psychology too. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments, and perhaps I will make more videos like this. Thanks, guys.